You can learn everything about a person by the car they drive, the female CEO said with a laugh. She believed it without hesitation. By the end of that morning, she would spend the rest of her life wishing she had never spoken those words. The autumn sun poured across the polished glass walls of Harrington Mobility's global headquarters just outside Detroit, turning rows of luxury electric vehicles into mirrors of silver and blue. Executives in tailored suits crossed the courtyard carrying tablets and coffee cups, while journalists adjusted cameras near the entrance, waiting for the unveiling of the company's newest flagship vehicle. It was supposed to be another flawless day for Claire Harrington, the 34-year-old CEO whose name had become synonymous with innovation, confidence, and impossible ambition. Every detail had been planned down to the second. Every guest had been carefully selected. Every luxury sedan in the executive parking lot gleamed as though it had never touched a road. Then an unfamiliar sound interrupted the perfect rhythm. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was the tired, uneven rumble of an old gasoline engine that sounded decades older than everything surrounding it. Heads turned almost instinctively. A faded tin sedan rolled slowly toward the visitor parking area, its paint weathered by years of snow, rain, and countless miles. Rust marked the lower edges of the doors. One headlight was slightly cloudy. The rear bumper carried scratches that no body shop had ever bothered to erase. If anyone had guessed its value, they might have offered little more than $120. Behind the wheel sat Ethan Walker. His denim work shirt was clean but worn soft from years of honest labor. His hands rested lightly on the steering wheel, rough from repairing engines instead of managing boardrooms. On the passenger seat sat a small pink lunchbox decorated with tiny stars, beside a child's backpack with a handwritten name stitched across the front. Before turning off the engine, Ethan smiled quietly at a crayon drawing taped to the dashboard. It showed a crooked little house, a rusty car, and two stick figures holding hands. Beneath an oversized yellow sun. Across the bottom, in uneven letters, were the words, "Love you, Daddy." He touched the corner of the picture with one finger before stepping outside. Several employees exchanged amused looks. A few whispered behind polite smiles. One young intern lowered his phone, uncertain whether he was witnessing something embarrassing or something important. Claire emerged from the revolving doors surrounded by board members, investors, and photographers. Her tailored navy suit reflected effortless authority. She noticed the old sedan immediately. Her eyes lingered on its faded paint before drifting toward Ethan's work boots. A small laugh escaped her lips. "I didn't realize our visitor parking accepted museum exhibits," she joked. The executives around her chuckled politely. Claire tilted her head with a confident smile. "That thing actually made it here?" Ethan looked at her calmly. There was no anger in his eyes. No embarrassment. Only the quiet patience of someone who had learned long ago that dignity never needed to raise its voice. He glanced once at his old sedan before answering softly. "It gets me exactly where I need to be." Claire smiled as if the conversation were already over. She couldn't possibly know that the least expensive vehicle in the parking lot carried something infinitely more valuable than every luxury car surrounding it. And before the afternoon was over, that forgotten sedan would become the only thing everyone wanted to talk about. Ethan closed the driver's door with the same gentle care he used every morning before taking Lily to school. The old sedan answered with a familiar metallic click, the kind of sound that only years of faithful service could produce. He slipped the small pink lunchbox into a worn canvas bag and walked toward the reception entrance without looking back. Behind the polished glass, conversations continued, but a few curious eyes followed him anyway. They had already decided who he was before hearing a single word. Ethan had grown used to that. The receptionist smiled politely. "Good morning, sir. May I help you?" Ethan returned the smile. "I am here to meet someone from the engineering department." She searched the appointment list before nodding. "Mr. Daniel Brooks will be with you shortly." Ethan thanked her and took a seat near the window. Sunlight stretched across the marble floor, while the quiet hum of elevators blended with distant conversations and the gentle hiss of the espresso machine in the lobby cafe. It was the kind of building designed to impress everyone who entered. Ethan noticed something else instead. A little girl, no older than 6, sat alone beside her mother, coloring quietly while waiting. Her crayons rolled across the floor when she accidentally bumped her backpack. Without hesitation, Ethan bent down, gathered every crayon, and handed them back one by one. The little girl smiled. "Thank you, mister." "You are welcome," he replied. "That is a beautiful rainbow." She grinned proudly before returning to her drawing. Across the lobby, Claire noticed the exchange while speaking with investors. She dismissed it almost immediately. Kind people were common. Extraordinary people were not. Daniel Brooks hurried into the lobby carrying a digital tablet under one arm. His tie was slightly crooked, and the expression on his face suggested another stressful morning. "Mr. Walker?" Ethan stood and extended his hand. Daniel shook it quickly. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. I really appreciate it." Claire glanced toward them with mild curiosity. One of her vice presidents leaned closer. "Who is he?" Daniel answered before anyone else could. "Independent mechanic. I found one of his technical notes online about thermal management systems. Honestly, it was fascinating." Claire raised one eyebrow. "A mechanic?" Daniel nodded. "He repairs engines, but he also writes some incredibly detailed engineering observations." Claire gave a restrained smile. "Interesting hobby." Ethan said nothing. He simply followed Daniel through a hallway lined with framed patents, prototype photographs, and awards celebrating decades of automotive innovation. As they entered the engineering laboratory, dozens of specialists worked around a sleek silver prototype resting beneath bright inspection lights. Screens displayed streams of diagnostics, while quiet conversations filled the room with technical language. Ethan stopped several feet away. He did not touch the vehicle. He simply looked. His eyes moved from the battery housing to the rear suspension, then toward the cooling channels beneath the floor. Daniel waited patiently. "Well," Ethan remained silent for another few seconds before speaking in the same calm voice that had never changed. "Has anyone tested heat expansion after sustained high-speed operation above 130 miles per hour during rapid ambient temperature changes?" Several engineers exchanged puzzled looks. One of them answered confidently. "That scenario is outside normal customer use." Ethan nodded once. "Perhaps, but the car does not know what is normal. It only knows physics." The room grew unexpectedly quiet. Daniel looked back toward the prototype. Claire, who had just entered through the opposite door, heard every word. She folded her arms with polite skepticism, convinced she was listening to another confident outsider who simply did not understand how complicated real engineering could be. Claire stepped closer to the prototype, her heels clicking softly across the polished concrete floor until the conversations around the laboratory gradually faded. She folded her arms and studied Ethan with the same measured confidence she brought into every board meeting. "You are suggesting our engineers overlooked something that has already passed hundreds of hours of simulation?" Her voice remained calm, but the question carried enough weight to make everyone pause. Ethan met her eyes without hesitation. "I am suggesting that simulations only know the questions we ask them." A faint smile appeared on Claire's face. "That is an interesting answer." One senior engineer chuckled quietly. "Physics does not care where someone works," Ethan added. "Neither does heat." The room settled into an uneasy silence before Daniel cleared his throat. "Mr. Walker, would you mind explaining what you see?" Ethan walked slowly around the prototype, never touching its body panels. His attention lingered beneath the rear quarter before moving toward the battery compartment. He knelt for a brief moment, observing the airflow channels through a maintenance opening, then stood again. "The cooling design is elegant," he said. "Very efficient during predictable conditions." Claire nodded proudly. "It should be. It took 4 years to perfect." Ethan looked back at the vehicle. "But if outside temperature changes quickly while the battery remains under sustained load, heat will collect here." He pointed toward an area hidden behind the structural frame. "It will not happen immediately. It will happen slowly enough that sensors may interpret it as normal variation until efficiency suddenly falls." One engineer frowned. "That section has already been validated." Ethan smiled politely. "Then I hope I am wrong." Claire glanced toward her engineering team. "Run the diagnostics again after lunch." Another executive leaned closer to her. "You are not seriously changing today's presentation because of a garage mechanic." Claire lowered her voice. "I am not changing anything. I simply enjoy proving people wrong with data." Ethan heard the remark, but offered no response. Daniel escorted him toward the observation platform overlooking the testing track beyond the laboratory windows. Outside, Sunlight reflected across nearly a mile of smooth pavement where technicians prepared the prototype for its final demonstration. Electric motors hummed in the distance, while digital timing boards flickered to life. Daniel leaned against the railing. "You really believe there is a problem?" Ethan rested his hands lightly on the metal rail. "I believe machines speak honestly if someone is willing to listen." Daniel smiled. "That sounds more like philosophy than engineering." Ethan's eyes remained fixed on the track. The best engineering usually is. At that moment, a familiar ringtone echoed softly from Ethan's pocket. His expression immediately warmed as he answered. "Hello, sweetheart." Lily's cheerful voice floated through the speaker. "Daddy, did you remember my science project?" Ethan laughed quietly. "It is sitting safely on the back seat, exactly where you left it. Do not forget to bring it tonight." "I would never forget. Love you. I love you more." He ended the call with the same gentle smile that had rested on his face while looking at her drawing that morning. Daniel watched silently. "Your daughter?" Ethan nodded. "She reminds me every day what really matters." Through the laboratory windows, Claire happened to glance toward the observation deck. She could not hear the conversation, but she noticed the way Ethan smiled while holding the phone. It was completely different from the reserved mechanic she had questioned only minutes earlier. For just an instant, curiosity replaced judgment. Then an announcement echoed throughout the building. "Final prototype demonstration begins in 15 minutes. Engineers hurried toward the testing area with renewed urgency. Claire straightened her jacket and walked confidently toward the control room. Ethan remained by the window for another quiet moment, watching technicians prepare the vehicle. Almost to himself, he whispered, "Please prove me wrong." The autumn breeze rippled across the empty test track as though the afternoon itself was holding its breath. The control room overlooked the proving grounds through a wall of floor-to-ceiling glass, giving every executive, journalist, and engineer a perfect view of the final evaluation. Large monitors displayed battery temperature, motor efficiency, cooling pressure, and dozens of live performance indicators that changed every second. Claire stood at the center beside the lead engineer, calm and composed, her confidence reassuring everyone around her. Outside, the silver prototype accelerated smoothly onto the track, its electric motors producing little more than a quiet rising hum. Applause spread through the observation room as the vehicle completed its first lap with flawless precision. "Everything is exactly where it should be," the lead engineer said proudly while watching the monitors. Claire allowed herself a satisfied smile. She glanced briefly toward Ethan, who remained near the back of the room beside Daniel. Unlike everyone else, he was not watching the vehicle. He was watching the temperature graph. Lap after lap, the prototype continued to impress. Reporters whispered excitedly while camera operators captured every elegant turn around the test circuit. One investor leaned toward Claire. "This launch is going to change the market." Claire nodded. "That has always been the plan." Then Ethan quietly spoke without raising his voice. "The battery temperature is climbing faster than the speed." Daniel looked at the display. "It is still within limits." Ethan nodded. For now. Nobody else reacted. The vehicle entered another high-speed section, moving well above 130 miles per hour. On the largest monitor, the cooling efficiency graph dipped almost too slightly to notice. Ethan saw it immediately. His expression never changed. "There," he whispered. Daniel leaned closer. "What did you see?" The cooling system corrected itself too late. Before Daniel could respond, one of the engineers pointed toward another screen. "We have a small reduction in power output." Another engineer answered confidently. "Software compensation. Completely normal." Claire folded her arms. "Continue the test." The prototype completed another lap, but this time the acceleration coming out of the final corner felt noticeably softer. Even spectators unfamiliar with engineering sensed something had changed. The driver calmly reported through the radio, "Performance feels slightly inconsistent under sustained load." Silence settled across the control room. Fingers moved quickly across keyboards. Diagnostic windows filled every monitor. "Check battery distribution." "Already checking." "Cooling pumps are operating normally." "Sensor readings are stable." Questions began replacing confidence. Claire stepped closer to the engineering console. "What is happening?" The lead engineer frowned. "We are not certain yet." Ethan remained perfectly still. His eyes never left the temperature graph. "It is not the pumps," he said quietly. Several heads turned toward him. One senior engineer sighed impatiently. With respect, we have an entire engineering department handling this. Ethan answered gently. I know. The engineer looked away. Outside, the prototype slowed as the driver reported another unexpected drop in available power. The vehicle remained completely safe and under full control, but the demonstration could no longer continue as planned. Journalists exchanged puzzled looks while camera operators lowered their equipment. Investors whispered among themselves. Claire stared through the glass at the silent car, now rolling back toward the service bay under its own power. The perfect presentation she had spent months preparing had quietly slipped away without anyone understanding why. Daniel looked from the monitors to Ethan. You predicted this before the car even left the building. Ethan gave a small shake of his head. I did not predict it. Daniel frowned. Then what did you do? Ethan looked once more at the cooling data before answering in the same calm voice that never carried pride. I listened to what the design was trying to tell us. Across the room, Claire heard every word. For the first time that day, she no longer saw the man with the old sedan. She saw the only person in the building who had remained unsurprised. The atmosphere inside the engineering center changed almost instantly. Minutes earlier, confident conversations had filled every corner of the room. Now only the quiet tapping of keyboards and the low hum of diagnostic equipment remained. The silver prototype rested inside the service bay with every access panel open while engineers surrounded it, searching through thousands of lines of data. Claire stood beside the largest monitor with her attention fixed on the scrolling numbers. I want every thermal log from the last 24 hours, she said calmly. Compare them against every previous endurance test. The lead engineer nodded without looking away from his screen. Already running the comparison. Another engineer added, nothing appears damaged. Every component is functioning within specification. Claire frowned. Then why did we lose performance? Nobody answered. Daniel quietly walked toward Ethan, who remained near the edge of the workshop with his canvas bag resting beside his feet. He did not attempt to join the discussion. He simply observed the vehicle with the patient expression of someone listening for an answer hidden beneath the noise. Would you take another look? Daniel asked. Ethan hesitated for only a moment. Only if everyone here is comfortable with that. Several engineers exchanged uncertain glances. One folded his arms but remained silent. Claire finally spoke. Go ahead. Ethan approached the prototype slowly. He circled the rear section once before kneeling beside the battery enclosure. Instead of reaching for expensive diagnostic equipment, he asked for a simple inspection flashlight and a clean shop towel. A technician handed both to him without a word. Ethan directed the light beneath the cooling channels, watching the reflections along the narrow aluminum passages. He ran the towel gently across one section, then held it beneath the light. A faint gray residue appeared on the fabric. Interesting, he whispered. The nearest engineer looked puzzled. What does that tell you? Ethan stood and pointed toward a narrow section hidden behind the structural brace. Airflow slows here after prolonged expansion. The engineer immediately disagreed. Computer modeling ruled that out years ago. Ethan nodded politely. The model assumed every internal surface stayed perfectly uniform. He held up the towel. Real materials age differently. Claire stepped closer for the first time without skepticism in her expression. Can you explain? Ethan looked toward the exposed battery housing. Tiny manufacturing variations become almost invisible individually. Over thousands of heating and cooling cycles, they begin working together. Eventually, airflow loses efficiency in one specific location. Sensors still report safe temperatures overall, but one hidden pocket becomes consistently warmer than everything around it. The software reacts only after efficiency has already started falling. The room became remarkably still. Engineers looked from the towel to the digital model displayed on the screen. Daniel quickly overlaid Ethan's observation onto the thermal simulation. A bright orange hotspot appeared almost exactly where Ethan had indicated. Run a localized scan, Daniel said. Seconds later, another monitor confirmed a gradual heat concentration that had escaped the original testing parameters. Nobody spoke. The lead engineer slowly removed his glasses, studying the new data with growing disbelief. That should not be possible, he murmured. Ethan answered gently. It probably was not possible when the prototype was new. Claire stared at the revised thermal image. Every number on the screen quietly supported the mechanic everyone had dismissed only hours earlier. She looked at Ethan, searching his face for even the smallest sign of satisfaction. She found none. There was no pride, no triumph, no desire to embarrass anyone. He seemed relieved only because the problem finally had a name. As silence settled over the workshop, an elderly man wearing a visitor badge entered through the laboratory doors, glanced once at the thermal diagram, then looked directly at Ethan. His eyes widened with unmistakable recognition before he quietly said, "It cannot be." Ethan Walker. The elderly visitor stood motionless for several seconds, his attention fixed entirely on Ethan. The quiet conversations throughout the laboratory faded as everyone sensed that something unexpected had just entered the room. His silver hair and steady posture carried the calm confidence of someone who had spent a lifetime solving impossible problems. The visitor removed his glasses slowly, as though needing to make certain his eyes were not deceiving him. "It really is you," he said softly. Ethan offered a respectful smile. "Good afternoon, Dr. Raymond Foster." Daniel looked between them with surprise. "You know each other?" Dr. Foster let out a quiet laugh, filled with disbelief. "Know each other? 10 years ago, this man solved a thermal stability problem that 3 research teams could not explain." Several engineers exchanged confused glances. Claire stepped forward. "Dr. Foster, are you referring to our consultant from the National Advanced Mobility Institute?" He nodded without taking his eyes off Ethan. "Long before that, we worked together during a federal clean energy research program. He was the youngest systems engineer in the entire project." The room became completely silent. Claire looked back at Ethan. "You were an engineer?" Ethan answered with the same calm voice he had used all day. "A long time ago." Dr. Foster smiled gently. Do not let his modesty fool you. Most people here have probably studied concepts influenced by his early research without realizing where those ideas came from. One engineer frowned in disbelief. "If that is true, why have none of us heard his name?" Ethan lowered his eyes for a moment before answering. "Because I stopped publishing." Dr. Foster's expression softened. "Not because you lacked ability. Because life changed." Nobody interrupted him. The older man continued quietly. His wife became seriously ill. Ethan left one project after another because every extra hour belonged with his family instead of another laboratory. Ethan remained silent. The memory rested gently behind his eyes, carrying sadness without bitterness. Dr. Foster continued. After she passed away, he disappeared from the engineering world almost overnight. Many of us assumed another company had hired him. We searched conference records, research journals, patent filings. Nothing. Daniel looked at Ethan with genuine amazement. "Where did you go?" Ethan smiled faintly. "Home." His answer was so simple that no one immediately understood. After a quiet moment, he continued. "Lily was only a little girl. She did not need a famous engineer. She needed her father." The laboratory remained still except for the distant sound of cooling fans inside the prototype. Claire felt an unfamiliar weight settle over her. She remembered the pink lunchbox, the crayon drawing, the gentle phone call. None of those moments had been an act. They were his real priorities. Dr. Foster walked toward the old mechanic and placed a hand lightly on his shoulder. "I always hoped you would come back." Ethan looked around the laboratory before answering. "I never really left engineering. I just started fixing the kinds of cars families could actually afford." One young engineer quietly asked, "Is that why you still work in a neighborhood garage?" Ethan nodded. "People depend on their cars to get to work, take their children to school, visit their parents, and build ordinary lives. Helping them has always mattered to me." No one laughed. No one questioned him. The expensive suits, prestigious titles, and framed awards surrounding the room suddenly seemed less impressive than the quiet dignity of the man standing beside the prototype. Claire found herself studying Ethan in an entirely different light. For the first time since meeting him, she realized she had spent the entire day measuring success by achievement, while the man before her had been measuring it by responsibility, kindness, and love. Then one of the technicians looked up from a newly completed simulation and said with visible astonishment, "Dr. Foster, Mr. Walker's thermal correction does not just solve the problem. It actually improves overall efficiency beyond our original design." The laboratory came alive again, but this time the energy felt different. There was no longer panic in the air. There was purpose. Engineers gathered around the prototype with renewed focus, while updated simulations spread across every monitor. The revised airflow model confirmed Ethan's observation again and again, each calculation strengthening the same conclusion. Daniel looked up from his workstation with growing excitement. If we reshape this cooling channel and adjust the software response window, we can implement the correction immediately. The lead engineer nodded. It is a small physical modification, but the thermal balance changes completely. Claire turned toward Ethan. How long would the adjustment take? Ethan studied the exposed battery enclosure for a quiet moment before answering. Less than an hour if everyone works together. Nobody questioned him now. The engineers immediately organized into teams, each person focusing on a different part of the update. Precision tools clicked softly against aluminum panels, while diagnostic screens refreshed every few seconds. Ethan moved naturally through the workshop, never acting like he was in charge, never giving orders louder than necessary. Instead, he asked simple questions. Can we verify that measurement one more time? Would you compare that reading before tightening the housing? Thank you. That looks much better. His calm manner spread through the room until even the most skeptical engineers found themselves listening carefully. Dr. Foster watched with quiet admiration. He always led this way, he whispered to Claire. The smartest person in the room never needed everyone to know it. Claire remained silent. Every assumption she had made that morning continued to disappear one by one. She remembered laughing in the parking lot. Now she watched the same man patiently thanking technicians half his age for handing him a wrench. There was no resentment in his voice, no desire to remind anyone who he had once been. Only respect. 40 minutes later, the prototype stood ready once again. Fresh diagnostic reports filled the screens with encouraging results. Daniel smiled for the first time all afternoon. Thermal stability is holding perfectly in simulation. The lead engineer added, better than our original design targets. Claire looked toward the proving grounds outside the glass wall. Journalists still waited near the track, uncertain whether the demonstration had been canceled. Investors continued checking their watches. Every passing minute increased the pressure. Claire took a slow breath before making her decision. We run the demonstration again. Several executives exchanged nervous glances. One board member stepped forward. Claire, if something unexpected happens a second time, the headlines tomorrow will be impossible to control. She considered his warning before looking back at Ethan. What do you think? Every eye in the room turned toward him. Ethan did not answer immediately. He walked once around the prototype, listening to the gentle hum of the cooling system. He placed one hand lightly against the side panel, closed his eyes for only a second, then stepped back with a quiet smile. The car is ready. His confidence did not sound dramatic. It sounded peaceful. Somehow that reassured everyone more than any technical presentation could have. Claire nodded. Prepare the track. Outside, technicians guided the silver prototype toward the starting position beneath the bright afternoon sky. The autumn breeze carried dry leaves across the smooth pavement, while cameras returned to life and reporters hurried back into place. Ethan remained standing near the observation window with his canvas bag resting beside his feet. His phone vibrated softly with a message from Lily that simply read, "Good luck today, Daddy. I know you will help somebody." Ethan smiled as he slipped the phone back into his pocket. At the starting line, the driver fastened the final safety checks, and as the countdown clock reached 10 seconds, the entire building fell into complete silence. The countdown reached 0, and the prototype surged forward with quiet confidence. Its electric motors delivered smooth, uninterrupted power as it disappeared into the first sweeping corner of the proving grounds. Inside the observation room, no one applauded this time. Every person watched the live telemetry instead. Temperature, cooling efficiency, battery output, motor response. Every graph moved with calm precision across the giant displays. Daniel leaned closer to his monitor, hardly blinking. Thermal balance is holding. Another engineer checked the airflow readings twice before smiling. The hotspot is gone. The lead engineer slowly lowered his coffee cup onto the desk without taking his eyes off the data. I have never seen numbers this stable. Outside, the silver prototype accelerated onto the longest straightaway, climbing past 130 miles per hour with effortless control. The driver reported through the radio, "Power delivery is completely consistent. Vehicle feels balanced. Cooling response is immediate. A wave of quiet relief spread across the engineering team. Claire remained standing perfectly still, her attention shifting between the monitors and the man near the window. Ethan watched the test with the same peaceful expression he had carried all afternoon. There was no celebration in his face because he had never been trying to prove himself right. He had only wanted the machine to perform the way it was always capable of performing. Lap after lap, the prototype continued exceeding expectations. The revised software reacted exactly when it should. The updated airflow maintained steady temperatures even under prolonged stress. Every completed circuit erased another layer of doubt that had surrounded Ethan since the moment he drove into the parking lot. Finally, the driver guided the vehicle back into the service lane and stepped out wearing a broad smile. "Best run we have ever recorded," he announced. "It feels like an entirely different car." The observation room erupted into applause. Engineers congratulated one another. Investors exchanged relieved handshakes. Reporters hurried to rewrite their opening paragraphs. Daniel turned toward Ethan first and extended his hand. "Thank you." Ethan accepted the handshake warmly. "You did the hard work." Daniel smiled. "No, you helped us see what we were missing." Claire slowly walked across the room until she stood only a few feet away from Ethan. The applause around them gradually faded into the background. She looked at the worn work shirt, the weathered boots, and the quiet eyes she had judged so quickly that morning. "I owe you an apology," she said sincerely. Ethan shook his head gently. "There is nothing to apologize for." Claire met his eyes. "There is." She paused before continuing. "When I saw your car, I decided who you were before I ever listened to you. I believed appearances told the whole story." Ethan smiled with quiet kindness. "Most people do." "You are not angry?" she asked. Being angry would not change what happened. His voice remained calm. "But learning from it can change tomorrow." Claire lowered her eyes for a brief moment. Those words carried more weight than any criticism could have. Dr. Foster watched the exchange with a quiet smile, recognizing once again the rare humility that had always defined Ethan. At that moment, a technician entered carrying the final performance report. He handed it directly to Claire. She scanned the numbers, then looked back toward Ethan with genuine amazement. "Your correction increased our projected driving range by nearly 18 miles on a full charge." Ethan gave a small nod. "Families appreciate every extra mile." Claire looked through the laboratory window toward the visitor parking lot, where the old faded sedan still rested beneath the afternoon sun. For the first time all day, she no longer saw an old car. She saw the vehicle that had quietly carried one extraordinary father to the place where everyone else finally learned the difference between appearance and worth. As the last reporters packed away their cameras and the engineers slowly returned to their workstations, the excitement that had filled the building gave way to a peaceful quiet. The afternoon sunlight stretched across the parking lot, casting long golden reflections over rows of polished executive vehicles. Ethan picked up his worn canvas bag, thanked Daniel, shook Dr. Foster's hand, and wished everyone a good evening. He asked for nothing in return. He did not mention patents, research, or recognition. He simply walked toward the exit with the same steady pace he had carried when he first arrived that morning. Claire watched him through the glass doors before following outside. Ethan had already reached his old sedan when she called his name. He turned with the same calm expression that had never once changed throughout the day. Claire stopped beside the weathered car and looked at it differently now. The faded paint, the small scratches, and the rust around the lower panels no longer suggested failure. They told the story of thousands of ordinary mornings, school drop-offs, grocery trips, and late-night drives home after long days of honest work. She noticed the crayon drawing still taped to the dashboard and the little pink lunchbox resting on the passenger seat. A gentle smile crossed her face. "This is your daughter's?" she asked quietly. Ethan nodded. "Lily made the drawing herself." Claire looked at the picture for another moment before asking the question that had stayed with her all afternoon. "After everything you accomplished, after everything Dr. Foster shared, why do you still drive this car?" Ethan rested one hand lightly on the roof. "Because every scratch has a memory." Claire listened without speaking. This car brought Lily home from the hospital when she was born. It took her to her first day of kindergarten. It carried us through snowstorms when we had almost nothing, and it never stopped trying. I could replace it tomorrow if I wanted to, but then I would lose a little piece of our story. The quiet breeze carried fallen leaves across the pavement. "Claire," looked around at the luxury vehicles surrounding them before returning her eyes to the old sedan. None of those expensive cars suddenly seemed very remarkable. "I judged you because of this car," she admitted softly. Ethan smiled kindly. "No, you judged a story you had not taken the time to read." Those words settled gently between them. Claire reached into her jacket and removed a business card. "I would like you to become our Chief Innovation Advisor. You could lead an entire division if you wanted." Ethan accepted the card respectfully, looked at it for a moment, then handed it back with a grateful smile. "That is an incredible honor." Claire waited. Ethan continued, "But tomorrow morning at 7:30, Lily has a science presentation at school. After that, I have customers waiting at my garage. Mrs. Jenkins needs her brakes repaired before she visits her grandchildren this weekend. Mr. Alvarez depends on his pickup truck to get to work before sunrise. They have been counting on me all week." Claire slowly lowered the card. She finally understood that success meant something very different to the man standing before her. Ethan opened the driver's door, carefully placed his canvas bag inside, and smiled once more. "If you ever need another opinion, you know where to find me." He started the old engine, and its familiar uneven rumble echoed softly through the parking lot. Claire watched the sedan pull away until it disappeared beyond the entrance, carrying nothing that looked impressive from the outside, yet carrying everything that truly mattered within. Standing alone beneath the quiet autumn sky, she realized that dignity never announced itself, kindness never demanded applause, and the greatest measure of a person's worth had never been the price of the car they drove, but the lives they carried safely home.